Before we begin today's story, I have a small request. If you enjoy emotional, heartfelt stories inspired by real life, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and subscribe to our channel with the notification bell turned on. Your support helps us bring you more meaningful stories every week. Now, let's begin. My name is Emily Carter, and I live in New York with my husband, Michael, and our 8-year-old son, Noah. I've been through many painful moments in my life, but nothing compares to the winter that changed everything I believed about kindness, destiny, and miracles. My older brother, Daniel, wasn't just my brother. After our parents passed away when I was only 15, he became my guardian, my best friend, and the only person who never stopped believing in me. He worked 2 jobs so I could finish college. He gave up his own dreams to help me build mine. That's why hearing the doctor say, "There's nothing more we can do," felt like my entire world had collapsed. Daniel had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Every treatment had failed. Every new medication brought hope for only a few days before reality returned. Finally, the doctors recommended transferring him to a hospice care center, where he could spend his remaining days peacefully instead of enduring endless hospital procedures. The hospice sat on a quiet hill just outside the city. It didn't feel like a hospital. There were beautiful gardens, tall oak trees, warm lights in every hallway, and soft piano music playing throughout the building. It was peaceful. Too peaceful. Almost as if everyone there was quietly waiting to say goodbye. Every evening after work, I drove straight to Daniel's room. Some days we laughed about childhood memories. Some days we simply sat together in silence. Sometimes he was too weak to speak, but he would squeeze my hand just enough to let me know he was still there. One afternoon, while leaving his room to grab a cup of coffee, I noticed an elderly woman sitting alone by the window across the hallway. She had silver hair, gentle blue eyes, and a faded light blue blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She wasn't watching television. She wasn't reading. She was simply staring through the window as snow slowly covered the garden outside. The next day, she was still there. The day after that, nothing had changed. What caught my attention wasn't her age. It was the fact that no one ever came to visit her. Every other patient received visitors. Children, grandchildren, friends, flowers. But her room remained silent. No voices, no laughter. No footsteps stopping at her door. Finally, I asked one of the nurses, "Does anyone ever visit the woman across from my brother's room?" The nurse looked toward the hallway and sighed. "Her name is Eleanor." She paused before continuing. "She's been here for almost 6 months. Not a single family member has visited. Every morning she asks if anyone called. And every evening, she quietly says goodnight to an empty room." Those words stayed with me the entire drive home. I couldn't stop thinking about her. How could someone spend the last chapter of their life completely alone? The following evening, I stopped at a small bakery near the hospice. I bought 2 warm blueberry muffins and a large cup of hot coffee. Standing outside Eleanor's door, I hesitated for a moment before gently knocking. A soft voice answered, "Come in." I slowly opened the door. The elderly woman looked up at me with surprised eyes. I smiled nervously and held out the small paper bag. I thought, maybe you'd like some fresh muffins. For several seconds, she didn't say a single word. Then tears slowly filled her eyes. In a trembling voice, she whispered, "It's been years since someone brought me something just because they cared." At that moment, I had no idea that walking into that room would completely change my life. The next evening, I arrived at the hospice a little earlier than usual. Before visiting Daniel, I stopped by the bakery again. This time, I bought fresh blueberry muffins, a cinnamon roll, and 2 cups of hot coffee. As I walked down the quiet hallway, I noticed Eleanor sitting in the exact same chair by the window. Snowflakes drifted gently outside, covering the garden in white. When I knocked softly on her door, she smiled before I even spoke. "I was hoping you'd come back," she said. Those simple words touched my heart more than I expected. I placed the paper bag on the small table beside her bed. "I wasn't sure if you liked blueberry muffins," I said with a smile. She laughed quietly. They were my husband's favorite. For a moment, the room became silent. She looked down at the muffin in her hands as if it carried memories from another lifetime. My husband used to bring these home every Friday after work, she whispered. He said life always felt a little brighter with warm muffins and hot coffee. I pulled a chair closer to her bed. What was his name? George. A gentle smile appeared on her face. We were married for 52 years. Her eyes sparkled as she spoke about him. He never forgot our anniversary. He danced with me in the kitchen. He made terrible pancakes every Sunday. I laughed. She laughed too. For the first time since I had met her, I saw genuine happiness on her face. Then her smile slowly disappeared. He passed away 8 years ago. I'm sorry, I whispered. She nodded. The hardest part wasn't losing him. It was losing everyone else afterward. She explained that after George died, her only son moved across the country for work. At first, he called every weekend. Then once a month. Eventually, the calls stopped completely. I don't even know if he remembers my birthday anymore, she said quietly. I didn't know what to say. No words seemed big enough to fill that kind of loneliness. Just then, one of the nurses entered to check Eleanor's medication. She smiled at me. I haven't seen Eleanor talk this much in months. After the nurse left, Eleanor reached into the drawer beside her bed. She carefully pulled out an old family photograph. The picture showed a young couple standing in front of a small white house. Between them stood a little boy with curly brown hair. That's my son, David. She gently traced his face with her finger. He was 7 years old here. He used to tell everyone that I made the best apple pie in New York. A tear rolled down her cheek. I wonder if he even remembers that. Without thinking, I reached over and held her hand. I think people never truly forget the love they receive, I said softly. Sometimes, life just pulls them too far away. She looked at me for several seconds. Then she squeezed my hand. You remind me of the daughter I always wished I'd had. My throat tightened. No one had ever said something like that to me before. When I stood to leave, she stopped me. Emily, will you come back tomorrow? I smiled. Of course. As I walked toward Daniel's room, I couldn't shake the feeling that meeting Eleanor wasn't just a coincidence. Something about her, something hidden behind her gentle smile, made me believe our lives were connected in a way I didn't yet understand. And I was about to discover just how true that feeling was. The following week became part of my daily routine. Every evening after work, I would first visit Daniel, then spend a little time with Eleanor before heading home. Some days we talked for only 15 minutes. Other days, we spoke for over an hour. She loved hearing stories about my son, Noah. Whenever I showed her new pictures on my phone, her face lit up with joy. He has your smile, she would always say. One snowy Thursday evening, Daniel looked much weaker than usual. His breathing was slower. His hands felt colder than they had ever been. The hospice doctor quietly asked me to step into the hallway. I'm afraid Daniel's condition has changed. His body is shutting down. It could happen tonight, or within the next few days. I felt my knees weaken. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. I returned to Daniel's room and sat beside him. He opened his eyes slightly and smiled. You've always been strong, Emmy, he whispered. Promise me. You'll keep smiling after I'm gone. Tears streamed down my face. I can't do this without you. He squeezed my hand with what little strength he had left. Yes, you can. You've already become the woman Mom and Dad dreamed you would be. Those were the last complete sentences he spoke that day. As evening turned into night, the hospice grew unusually quiet. Most visitors had already gone home. Only the soft hum of medical equipment echoed through the hallways. Around 9:30 p.m. A nurse gently touched my shoulder. Emily, Eleanor is asking for you. I looked at Daniel. He was asleep. I'll only be gone for a minute, I whispered before leaving his room. When I entered Eleanor's room, she looked different. Her face was pale. Her breathing was shallow. She slowly reached out her trembling hand. I quickly held it. I'm glad you came. I'm here, I answered softly. She looked directly into my eyes. There was fear, but also certainty. Then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, she said, "Emily, don't stay here tonight." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Go home. Right now." I glanced toward the hallway. "My brother needs me." She shook her head weakly. "Your family needs you more." A chill ran through my body. "What are you talking about?" She closed her eyes for a moment before speaking again. "I don't have much time. But please, trust me. Go home tonight." I tried to ask another question, but she gently squeezed my hand. "No more questions. Just go." Before I could respond, a nurse entered the room to check her oxygen. I stepped outside, completely confused. Nothing she said made any sense. How could she possibly know anything about my family? Was she simply confused because of her illness? Or was it only a coincidence? I stood in the hallway for several minutes, unable to decide. If I left, I might lose the chance to spend my brother's final hours with him. If I stayed, why couldn't I stop thinking about Eleanor's warning? My heart told me to remain beside Daniel, but something deep inside kept repeating Eleanor's words. Go home tonight. After one last look at my sleeping brother, I made a decision that would change my life forever. I picked up my coat, walked toward the parking lot, and drove into the snowy night, still wondering why an elderly woman with no family had begged me to leave. I had no idea that within the next hour, I would discover the terrifying reason behind her warning. The roads were almost empty. Snow continued falling as I drove through the quiet streets of New York. I kept replaying Eleanor's words in my mind. Your family needs you more. Go home tonight. The closer I got to my neighborhood, the more uneasy I felt. I tried calling my husband, Michael. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. It's probably nothing, I whispered to myself, trying to calm my racing heart. When I turned onto my street, something immediately felt wrong. Red and orange lights flashed in the distance. Several neighbors were standing outside. As I got closer, my heart nearly stopped. The flashing lights were in front of my house. I slammed on the brakes and jumped out of the car. Smoke poured from one of the upstairs windows. A neighbor ran toward me. Emily, thank God you're here. What happened? I shouted. There was an electrical fire. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My husband, my son, they're inside. I tried running toward the front door, but a firefighter blocked my path. It's too dangerous. I struggled against him. My family is in there. Before he could answer, the front door suddenly opened. Michael stumbled outside, carrying Noah in his arms. Both of them were coughing from the thick smoke, but they were alive. I ran to them, wrapping my arms around both of them. I couldn't stop crying. Noah buried his face against my shoulder. Mom. I was scared. Michael looked exhausted. The smoke detector woke me up. I thought it was a false alarm, but when I opened the bedroom door, the hallway was already full of smoke. The fire captain walked over after the flames were under control. You were very lucky. The fire started because of an electrical short inside the kitchen wall. It spread much faster than normal. He pointed toward the second floor. If your husband had woken up even 10 minutes later. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I already understood. 10 more minutes. And I might have lost everything. As firefighters continued working, I looked up at the dark winter sky. Only one thought filled my mind. How did Eleanor know? She had never visited my home. She had never met my husband. She didn't even know where I lived. Yet somehow, she begged me to leave the hospice and return home that very night. The next morning, after making sure Michael and Noah were safe with my sister, I drove straight back to the hospice. I couldn't wait to thank Eleanor. I wanted to tell her she had saved my family. As soon as I entered the building, I noticed something unusual. The hallway was completely silent. Several nurses stood together with sad expressions. When one of them saw me, her eyes filled with tears. Emily, I'm so sorry. I felt my stomach tighten. What happened? The nurse gently lowered her head. Eleanor passed away peacefully early this morning. Everything around me seemed to stop. No, I whispered. I was supposed to thank her. The nurse reached into her pocket and handed me a small white envelope. She asked us to give this to you, only after she was gone. My hands trembled as I stared at the envelope. Across the front, written in beautiful handwriting, were just 4 words. For my dear Emily. I took a slow breath, not knowing that the letter inside would reveal a secret Eleanor had carried for decades. My hands were trembling as I stared at the white envelope. Written across the front, in neat cursive handwriting, were the words, "For my dear Emily." I couldn't bring myself to open it right away. The nurse gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "She finished writing it late last night," she said softly. "She told us to make sure only you received it." I swallowed hard. "Did she say anything else?" The nurse nodded. "Only this. Tell Emily that kindness always finds its way home." I thanked her quietly and walked into Eleanor's empty room. The chair by the window was still there. The blanket she always wrapped around herself had been neatly folded on the bed. Her coffee mug sat untouched on the small table. For the first time since meeting her, the room felt painfully silent. I slowly sat in her favorite chair and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. It read, "My dear Emily. If you're reading this, it means I've already said goodbye to this world. I don't want you to cry for me. During my final weeks, you gave me something no medicine ever could. You gave me friendship. You made me feel seen. You reminded me that I still mattered. Every evening, you walked through my door carrying muffins, coffee, and a smile. But what you never realized was that you were healing my heart long before my body gave up. Thank you for treating an old stranger like family." By then, tears were already falling onto the paper. I continued reading. "I've spent years regretting the mistakes I made as a mother. I loved my son more than anything. But after my husband died, grief changed me. We argued. We stopped speaking. Then one day, he disappeared from my life. I waited for a phone call that never came. Every birthday, every Christmas, every Mother's Day, I kept hoping he would walk through my door. He never did. I paused to wipe away my tears. No wonder she looked toward the hallway every single day. She wasn't waiting for a nurse. She was waiting for her son." The final page felt heavier than the others. My heart began racing before I even read the first sentence. "Emily, there is one final secret I've carried for many years. Last night, while holding your hand, I finally understood why God brought you into my life. I stopped breathing." The next sentence changed everything. "Years ago, I met your parents. They probably never knew my name, but I have never forgotten theirs." I stared at the page in complete disbelief. My parents? How could Eleanor possibly know them? I quickly turned to the last page, but before I could continue reading, someone knocked gently on the open door. I looked up. A man in his early 40s stood there holding a bouquet of white lilies. His eyes were red from crying. In a shaking voice, he asked, "Excuse me, was this Eleanor's room?" I slowly nodded. "Yes." The man closed his eyes. "I'm too late." Then, barely able to speak, he whispered, "She was my mother." At that moment, I realized Eleanor's story wasn't over yet. In fact, the biggest truth had just walked through the door. For a few seconds, neither of us said a word. The man stood frozen at the doorway, clutching the bouquet of white lilies so tightly that a few petals fell onto the floor. His eyes never left the empty hospital bed. "I was too late," he whispered again. "I promised myself I'd come." My heart ached as I looked at him. Are you David?" He slowly nodded. "My name is David Thompson. I'm Eleanor's son." The name immediately reminded me of the old family photograph Eleanor had shown me only a few days earlier. The little curly-haired boy standing between his parents. That little boy was now standing in front of me as a grown man, filled with regret. He walked toward the bed and gently placed the flowers beside Eleanor's folded blanket. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, tears rolling down his face. "I'm so sorry." I quietly stepped back, giving him a moment alone. After several minutes, he turned toward me. "Were you the woman who visited her every day?" I nodded. "Yes." A faint smile crossed his face. "She talked about you every time we spoke." I looked at him in surprise. "You talked to her?" He lowered his head. Only once. A nurse called me 3 nights ago. They told me my mother's condition had become critical. I was in Seattle for work. I booked the first flight I could. His voice cracked. But a snowstorm delayed everything. My connecting flight was canceled. I rented a car and drove through the night. He looked around the silent room. I kept telling myself she'd wait for me. But I was wrong. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I remembered the letter still resting in my hands. David, before she passed away, your mother wrote this. I haven't finished reading it yet. His eyes filled with emotion. Would you read the rest aloud? I slowly unfolded the final page. My voice trembled as I continued. Emily, if David ever returns, please don't let him carry guilt for the rest of his life. Tell him I forgave him years ago. A mother's love never disappears, even after years of silence. Every birthday, every Christmas, I prayed that he would be happy. I never hated him. I only missed him. David covered his face with both hands. His shoulders shook as he cried. I thought she hated me. I believed she never wanted to see me again. I gently shook my head. No, she waited for you every single day. I told him how Eleanor looked toward the hallway every morning. How she smiled whenever footsteps echoed outside her door. How she believed that one day her son would come back. David sank into the chair beside the bed. I wasted 8 years. My wife kept asking me to call. My daughter wanted to meet her grandmother. But every month I told myself, next week, next month, when work slows down. Then he looked directly at me. And now, I've run out of time. Tears filled my own eyes. There is something else you should know. I handed him the first pages of Eleanor's letter. Your mother believed meeting me wasn't an accident. She wrote that she had known my parents many years ago. David looked shocked. My mother knew your family? I don't understand. Neither do I. He carefully turned the final page over. A small folded piece of paper slipped from the envelope. Neither of us had noticed it before. I picked it up. It wasn't a letter. It was an old address, along with a faded black and white photograph. The moment I saw the faces in that picture, my heart nearly stopped. Standing beside Eleanor and her husband were my mother and father, smiling, as if they had once been close friends. I looked at David in disbelief. What is this? He stared at the photograph just as stunned as I was. I've never seen this picture before. At that moment, we both realized the truth. Eleanor hadn't entered my life by coincidence. Our families had been connected for decades, and the photograph was about to uncover a secret that had been buried for more than 30 years. David and I stared at the old photograph in complete silence. It was faded around the edges, but the faces were still clear. On the left stood Eleanor and her husband, George. On the right, my parents. And between them were 2 little children. One was a young boy with curly brown hair. The other was a little girl wearing a red winter coat. I looked closer. My heart skipped a beat. That's me, I whispered. David leaned in. And that's me. Neither of us could believe what we were seeing. Our families hadn't simply known each other. We had once spent time together. But why couldn't I remember any of it? The photograph had been taken more than 30 years earlier. David carefully turned it over. Written in faded blue ink were the words, Christmas, 1994. Friends become family. Before either of us could speak, the hospice administrator entered the room. Emily, David, I believe these belong to your mother. She handed David a small wooden box that had been kept in Eleanor's personal locker. There were instructions to give this only to her son. David thanked her quietly. His hands shook as he unlocked the tiny brass latch. Inside were old letters, Christmas cards, several photographs, and a small velvet pouch. He opened it carefully. Inside was a delicate silver necklace. Attached to it was a tiny heart-shaped pendant. The moment I saw it, my eyes widened. Without thinking, I reached into my purse. Around my wrist, I always carried a small silver charm that had belonged to my late mother. I placed it beside the pendant. The 2 pieces fit together perfectly. They had once been a single necklace. David looked at me in disbelief. My mother always told me she gave half of her favorite necklace to her closest friend. I could barely speak. My mother used to tell me the same story, but she never told me who that friend was. We looked at each other. The answer had been sitting in front of us the entire time. Our mothers had been best friends. Then David found one final sealed envelope. Across the front, Eleanor had written, "To Emily and David. Read together." Neither of us moved. David slowly opened the envelope. Inside was one last handwritten letter. I began reading aloud. "If you're reading this together, then my final wish has come true. Years ago, your parents were inseparable friends. Our families celebrated birthdays, Christmases, and vacations together. Emily, when your parents died in the terrible highway accident, I wanted to help raise you. But your uncle moved you away before I could even say goodbye. From that day on, we lost contact forever." My eyes filled with tears. So that was why she had recognized my family name. She hadn't met a stranger. She had found the little girl she once loved like her own daughter. I continued reading. "When you first walked into my room carrying those blueberry muffins, I recognized your smile immediately. It was your mother's smile. I thanked God for giving me one last chance to see you again before I left this world." David wiped tears from his face. "So that's why she cared about you so much." I nodded silently. Then I reached the final paragraph. My voice broke as I read it. "Please don't let our families become strangers again. Life is too short for pride. Forgive quickly. Love deeply. Stay together." That will be my greatest legacy. Neither of us spoke. The room was completely silent. But in that silence, I finally understood why Eleanor had entered my life. She hadn't been sent to change only my future. She had come to heal the broken past of two families. As David carefully folded the letter, his phone suddenly rang. He answered it. Within seconds, the color drained from his face. He looked at me with frightened eyes and whispered, "Emily, it's about your brother, Daniel." My heart dropped. What happened? David took a deep breath before answering. The words he spoke next would change my life forever. My heart stopped the moment I saw David's expression. He slowly lowered his phone and looked at me with tear-filled eyes. "Emily, the hospice just called. They said your brother's condition became critical a few minutes ago." Without saying another word, I grabbed my coat and rushed toward the parking lot. David followed behind me. "I'll drive," he said. "You shouldn't be alone." The entire drive felt endless. Snow continued falling outside as I silently prayed. "Please, just let me see him one more time." When we reached the hospice, two nurses were already waiting near Daniel's room. One of them gently smiled. "He's still awake. He's been asking for you." I hurried inside. Daniel looked weaker than ever. His breathing was slow, but when he saw me, he managed to smile. "There you are. I was waiting." I held his hand tightly. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He glanced toward David, who quietly stood near the doorway. "Who's your friend?" Before I could answer, David stepped forward. "My name is David. It's an honor to meet you." Daniel smiled softly. "You have kind eyes." Then he looked back at me. "I've been thinking. Life isn't measured by how long we live. It's measured by how many lives we touch." His words reminded me of Eleanor, a woman who had spent months alone, yet changed countless lives with one final act of love. Daniel reached beneath his pillow and handed me a small folded note. "I wrote this yesterday. I wasn't sure I'd get another chance." With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside were only a few lines. "Emily, don't waste your life chasing things that won't matter 20 years from now. Spend time with the people you love. Forgive before it's too late. And never leave someone feeling forgotten. Love, Daniel." I couldn't hold back my tears. "I promise. I'll remember every word." Daniel gently squeezed my hand one last time. "Take care of Noah. Tell him his uncle loved him." Then, with one peaceful breath, he closed his eyes. The room became completely still. A nurse quietly checked his pulse. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and softly whispered, "I'm sorry." I leaned over and hugged my brother for the last time. Although my heart was broken, I also felt something unexpected. Peace. Because I had been there. Because he wasn't alone. Just as I stood up, David placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. My mother spent her last days believing she had no family. He paused. But because of you, she left this world feeling loved. I smiled through my tears. And because of Eleanor, my family is still alive. Several weeks later, David invited Michael, Noah, and me to his home for Christmas dinner. For the first time in decades, the two families sat around the same table. There was laughter. There were old photographs. There were tears. And there were stories that should have been shared many years earlier. Before dinner, David stood and raised a small glass. To our parents. And to my mother, Eleanor. She believed kindness always finds its way home. Everyone quietly nodded. I looked at Noah as he laughed with David's little daughter. Watching them play together, I realized something beautiful. The friendship our parents had once shared had begun again through the next generation. Every Christmas since then, we visit Eleanor and Daniel's graves together. We leave fresh flowers and 2 warm blueberry muffins. Because every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change someone's life forever.